The wine flowed sweet until someone tasted death. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love hearing them. Wolfe uncorks a deadly vintage. If I had known that a bottle of cheap red wine from Brooklyn was going to knock Nero Wolfe's sense of domestic peace off its pedestal, I might have switched it out for vinegar and saved us both a week of high tension and low civility. The thing about living with Wolfe is that you get used to a rhythm, a tempo of life that doesn't tolerate syncopation. The orchids upstairs bloom on schedule, Fritz's kitchen sings in 3 daily movements, and Wolfe himself moves no faster than the sun across the study carpet. So when a Thursday evening starts with Wolfe glaring at a bottle instead of a steak, you know something's amiss. It began at 7:15 sharp. Fritz had just brought in the main course, duck à l'orange with roasted turnips that even a pope would bless twice. When Theodore Horseman, the orchid man, broke the sacred rule and came down from the plant rooms during dinner, he stood in the doorway, cap in hand, looking like he'd rather face the plague. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, voice pinched, "you have a visitor." Wolfe's fork froze mid-air. "A visitor?" he repeated, slow as molasses and twice as heavy. "At this hour?" "Yes, sir. She said it was urgent." "She," Wolfe murmured, and looked at me as if women had just been invented for the purpose of interruption. "Archie?" I wiped my mouth and stood. "On my way." The she in question was in the front room, a woman of about 35, the kind you'd notice in a crowded subway, not because she wanted to be noticed, but because she didn't. Her clothes were respectable without being expensive, her eyes sharp, her lips tight around something unsaid. On the table sat a bottle of wine, uncorked but unopened. It wore no label. "I need to see Mr. Wolfe," she said. "Now." "Lady," I told her, "that's like saying you need to see the Pope on laundry day. He doesn't do now. You'll have to give me more than that." Her hand tightened on her purse. "It's about that," she said, nodding at the bottle. "He'll want to hear this." I carried the message upstairs to the dining room. Wolfe listened, sighed, and gave a single, resigned grunt. "Bring her," he said, "and the bottle." So I did. The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Lydia Shale, of Brooklyn, of course. The wine, she explained, came from her late husband's small import business. A few weeks ago, she'd received a note, unsigned, untraceable, that claimed one of the bottles he'd sold before his death was poisoned. She hadn't gone to the police because, she said, the note also mentioned her name, in a way that made the warning sound more like a threat. Wolfe lifted the bottle with 2 fingers and examined it the way a man inspects a moth that's landed on his steak. "Madame," as he said, "the Department of Health handles toxins. I handle imbecility. Why not take it to them?" "Because," she said evenly, "the man who wrote the note was killed 2 nights ago." That caught him. Wolfe put the bottle down carefully, his eyes narrowing like a cat watching a cricket. "Ah, the imbecility may be contagious." I could feel the air change. Fritz, hovering by the door, froze. Wolfe looked at Mrs. Shale and said, "You are here because you fear you are next." She didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Very well," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You will leave the bottle here. Mr. Goodwin will obtain such particulars as your sense of urgency permits. You will not contact the police unless I instruct it. Return home, and do not drink anything not prepared by your own hand." She looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Wolfe's tone dissuaded her. After she left, the brownstone was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Then Wolfe said, "Archie?" "Yes, sir." "Fetch Saul Panzer." "Already? You haven't even decided you're interested." He gave me a glare I've come to translate as, "Don't fence me, Archie." "I have decided, though not yet why. A bottle of wine has entered my house uninvited, and a woman's life may depend upon what's in it. That offends both my hospitality and my reason." He reached for his beer, took a long drink, and said quietly, "Someone is playing a game. I intend to win." I got Saul on the line before Fritz could mourn the duck. Saul doesn't waste words after 7 p.m. I told him a woman, Brooklyn, wine, a dead man, and a bottle on Wolfe's table. He said he'd be by in 20 minutes if I wanted him breathing in person, or he could be an ear now and a pair of feet at 9 in the morning. Wolfe lifted 2 fingers without looking at me. The fingers meant morning. I relayed it. Saul said right and snapped off. Wolfe didn't touch the bottle. He eyed it the way he eyes a rare cattleya with a fungus. "Fritz," he said, "a box with a lock." Fritz brought the tin cash box we use for petty cash when visitors look too petty. We lined it with a folded tea towel and nested the bottle like an egg. Fritz took it to the pantry and made a production of the key. He does that when he's alarmed. "Archie," Wolfe said, "call Mrs. Shale, names, addresses, and dates. I want her husband's death, the business, and the dead man who wrote a note from the grave." I phoned. Lydia Shale sounded as if she was walking from one end of a narrow apartment to the other, turning at the walls. Her husband, Maurice Shale, called Maury by everyone with a claim on him, owned Shale and Rullo Imports, small-time, Red Hook, a rented brick rectangle with a tar roof and a fondness for city inspectors. He died 4 months ago, January 7th, after a fall. Cellar stairs, an ambulance, no foul, play. The partner, Chester Rullo, known as Chet, kept the business running. The note came a week ago. It said one of the bottles sold under Maury's hand was not safe to drink, and mentioned that if she talked to police, the widow of Shale would taste the difference. The note writer's death 2 nights back was on the radio. Name, Patrick Honan, dock rat elevated to night watchman. He was found in his rooming house. Gas leak, window painted shut. "Who else saw the note?" I asked. "No one," she said. I burned it. "Fine," I said. "We'll just ask the ashes what font it was." She didn't laugh. She gave me Rullo's number, the Red Hook address, and 3 names of shippers and buyers who used to ring Maury. Barton Vale, rival importer across the river. Elena Barlow, restaurant owner who bragged she could sell thermometers to Eskimos if they were pretty. And a sommelier at the Hotel Caledonia who insisted on being called Maître Nico. She didn't know if any of them had been near Brooklyn in January. She knew all of them liked to talk about provenance as if it were one of the saints. I clicked off and gave Wolfe the distillation. He adjusted in his chair an inch, which for him is a vault. "A fall," he said. "A gas leak. Both adequate for city statistics. And this," he flicked a glance toward the pantry, "unlabeled. If our bottle is part of a lot, why no label? If it is unique, why threaten a widow in bulk?" Pway. "Something else," I said. "If the note warned of poison, why send the warning to the one person with no authority to pull stock? Unless the purpose wasn't to save anyone, but to frighten her into doing something. Such as paying," Wolfe said, "or speaking, or refusing to speak." He leaned back and closed his eyes. When Wolfe closes his eyes and doesn't snore, the gears are catching. The gears clicked for a minute. Then he opened them. "You will go to Red Hook tomorrow. Mr. Panzer will have prepared the ground. See Mr. Rullo. Observe his premises. Ask for invoices, customs, and the invoice for the lot associated with that bottle. You will also see Mrs. Shale again, on her turf. She will be more candid where she can fuss with her teapot." "What about tonight?" I asked. "Tonight," he said, reaching for his beer. "We sleep. The bottle sleeps. We allow our intruder," he meant the situation, not the wine, "to believe its intrusion has been unremarkable." That was optimistic. At 9:30, the doorbell went ding in a way that announced a messenger who wasn't getting a tip. I went to the front and found a kid with a canvas bag and gum. The envelope he handed me was addressed to N. Wolfe, Esq. I don't know why criminals think Esq softens the blow. I signed, slipped the kid a quarter to prove I'm not prejudiced against gum, and returned to the office. The envelope held a cork in tissue paper and a single line on cheap stock. "Keep your nose out." Wolfe barely glanced at it. "A man who sends a cork to discourage inquiry," he said, "appreciates puns more than accuracy. Put the cork in the box with the bottle. Won't it feel lonely without a bottle to match?" "Archie," he said, "if the sender intended precision, he would have sent a stopper." He shut his eyes again. "Tomorrow." Fritz brought coffee. I asked him if the pantry smelled like anything besides shelves and virtue. He said no, but his left eyebrow showed resentment on behalf of all kitchen storage. The night settled. I sat with the Gazette, but the column inches on Honan's death said what you'd expect. Widowed landlady smelled gas, found towel under the door. Police suspected a careless tenant with a stove and a headache. No one mentioned any notes, widows, or Brooklyn wine. In the morning, Theodore stomped down to complain about humidity as if I controlled the clouds and found me tying my tie. He glared at the pantry door. "Mr. Goodwin, is there anything in there that could release fumes?" "Only Fritz's temper," I said. "Why?" "The upper racks," he said, "felt wrong. Not the plants, the air. Heavy." I filed it under worry later. Saul came at 9:15 precisely, smiled once with half his face, and listened while I gave him the names. He had already been to Red Hook at dawn, because Saul believes in beating both the rush and the sun, and reported that Shale and Rullo's roll-up door was half rust, half paint. No police tape on anything in sight. The rooming house where Honan died had a landlord with a linen voice and a cash drawer. The landlord mentioned a nice fellow who'd asked about Honan last week. Tall, thin, precise suit, no accent, paid for the conversation with a 5. "Not Rollo," Saul said. "Not a dock rat. Someone who likes starch." Wolfe nodded once. "Go to Mr. Rollo. Tell him I require his presence here at 11, he said, and that his refusal would be a discourtesy I would not forget. Saul left. I took my hat. Wolfe's eyes were shut again, but he spoke without opening them. "Archie." "Sir." "Do not drink anything in Brooklyn," he said. "Not even the water." That was sensible, but for once it didn't make me smile. Outside, the day smelled like thawing river and truck brakes. I headed for the bridge, thinking of a cellar stair, a gas leak, and a cork that wanted to be a threat. Red Hook at 10 in the morning smells like the city before it remembers to shave. Salt, oil, and sweat under a layer of honest dirt. The warehouse of Shale and Rullo sat 3 streets off the water, brick gone to rust, windows blind with dust. A sign the size of a napkin hung crooked over the door. I could tell it was a family business by how proudly it ignored appearances. A man in shirt sleeves was arguing with a barrel when I walked in. The barrel didn't argue back, which gave him time to notice me. He was about 40, built to fit a poker table rather than a barbell, with hair that had once made barbers money. "If you're selling anything, we don't need it," he said, voice coated in sandpaper. "I'm buying," I told him. "Information. Name's Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe." He blinked. "The detective? What does he want with me?" "Maybe nothing," I said. "Maybe a conversation. Maybe lunch. Depends on what you say about a lady named Lydia Shale and a bottle of wine with no label." That got me half a second of tight silence, followed by a shrug. "You cops?" "If I were, I'd be writing, not talking." "You Chester Rollo?" "That's me." "Then I'll save you the suspense. Mrs. Shale came to Wolfe last night. Someone sent her a warning about poisoned wine. The man who wrote it, Patrick Honan, is now deceased via gas. Wolfe's interested in whether your operation's handing out wine that kills or just gossip that does." Rollo stared at me long enough for the air to get stale. Finally, he reached into his back pocket for a handkerchief and wiped his palms. Look, Maury's death was an accident. Everyone said so. Honan's too. That guy'd light a match to check if gas was on. We had one batch that came in mislabeled, sure, but nothing dangerous. I kept it separate. Sold none. Show me, I said. He led me into a back room with wooden racks and a floor that complained about visitors. Half the bottles wore European labels with the kind of calligraphy that likes to be admired more than read. In the corner, a dozen unlabeled bottles stood like guilty cousins. Those, he said, leftovers from a Portuguese shipment. Maury handled himself. He was going to print new labels before the accident. I told him we should dump them, but he said waste is worse than sin. Did any of these reach customers? Not a chance. Then how did Mrs. Shale end up with one? He opened his mouth, then closed it. Hell if I know. Maybe Maury gave her one. He liked gifts, called them publicity. Did you ever see this Honan? Sure, night watch at the pier. Always needed a drink or a favor. Maury used him sometimes to move stock when the union boys got fussy. What about a tall, neat dresser, suit sharp enough to slice bread, asking questions about Honan last week? Rollo frowned. Never saw him. Sounds like a salesman, not our crowd. I asked for a list of everyone who handled the Portuguese batch, dock to warehouse. He scribbled 5 names, himself, Maury, Honan, a driver named Wilbur Crane, and an inspector named Vale, Barton Vale, the rival importer. Odd pairing, I said. Competitors don't usually share bottles. Vale did a favor once, got us clearance when customs hiccuped. Maury trusted him. I thanked Rouleau and left him to his barrels. Outside, Saul was leaning against my car, chewing on nothing. Rollo's clean, he said. Too nervous to fake it, but somebody watched the building this morning. Grey sedan, no plates front. Drove off when I got close. Keeping us company. More like keeping score. We drove to Brooklyn Heights, where Mrs. Shale lived in a building that wanted to be polite but couldn't afford manners. She answered in a robe and eyes that hadn't slept. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender and fear. I'm sorry, she said, ushering us in. I didn't expect... Good, I said. Expectations ruin surprise. We've been to your husband's warehouse. Care to explain how a bottle he supposedly never sold ended up here? She hesitated, then moved to the kitchen and opened a cupboard. 3 bottles, all unlabeled twins of the one she'd brought to Wolfe, stood in a neat row. He gave me a case, she said, for Christmas. Said it was special. I only kept 4. Drank the rest? No, gave them to friends. I think 2 went to Mrs. Barlow. 1 to a man Maury knew from the docks. Patrick Honan? Her face twitched. Yes, I thought it was kind. He was alone at the holidays. I looked at Saul. He was writing names in that tiny script of his. Mrs. Shale, I said. Anyone else know about these gifts? She bit her lip. Chet might. He came by the next day. Said Maury's generosity was bad business. We quarreled. Did you keep the cork from your bottle? She blinked at me. Why would I? Because someone just sent us one by mail. As a warning. Her hands went still. Oh, God. Saul gave her a cigarette, and she took it like a drowning woman grabbing driftwood. I didn't tell you, she said after a drag. But the day after the note came, someone broke in here. Nothing stolen, just a window latch broken. The police called it random. Sure, I said. And the Pope calls wine a beverage. We stayed another 10 minutes, gathering details. The handwriting on the note. Blocky, uneven, probably printed with fear. The envelope mailed from downtown Brooklyn. She couldn't name any enemies, but she mentioned that Barton Vale had been too sympathetic after Maury's death, dropping by with condolences and inquiries about her husband's accounts. When we left, Saul peeled off to trace the sedan. I drove back to Manhattan through mid-morning haze, thinking about a dead importer who handed out unmarked bottles like party favors, and a watchman who died breathing his own air. Wolfe was in the office, reading something fat and Latin when I came in. I gave him the report from start to finish. He listened, eyes half shut, fingers steepled. "So," he said finally, "Mrs. Shale's bottle is one of 4, of which at least one was in Honan's possession at his death. The threat preceded his death. The source of the bottles is disputed? And the cork, Mr. Goodwin? Still sitting in the box like an orphan. Good. You will find Miss Barlow and determine whether she opened hers. Before or after lunch?" "After," he said. "One must not confront peril on an empty stomach." "Fritz!" The kitchen door swung open as if Fritz had been waiting for the cue. "Yes, sir," chilled Chablis, Wolfe said, "to remind us that not all wines are instruments of menace." He looked at me. "And Archie, see that the car is fueled. I have an intuition this affair will require more mileage than wisdom prefers." That was Wolfe, for "we're in it." And as I left the office, I had the odd sense that somewhere in Brooklyn, someone was uncorking trouble just for us. I found Elena Barlow at 11:45, running her restaurant like a ringmaster who didn't trust her lions. The place, Barlow's Table, was tucked in the village, half French in name and all Brooklyn in temperament. She was short, quick, and wore perfume like a dare. I showed her my card, which she ignored, and said, "Detectives only eat here if they pay full price. House rules." "I'm not here for lunch," I said. "I'm here for your wine list, specifically any bottles given to you by a man named Maurice Shale." That did it. Her chin came up like I'd just insulted her risotto. "Maurice Shale," she said, "was a sweetheart. He brought me samples. Half my regulars drank his Chianti and survived. You telling me I killed them?" "Not yet," I said. "Mrs. Shale tells me you got 2 bottles from her late husband's private stock. Unlabeled. That ring a bell?" She frowned, thinking. "Sure. He gave them to me in December, said they were from a special shipment. I kept them for a rainy night. Why?" "One of those bottles might have killed a man." Her eyes widened. "Not fear, exactly, but something close to calculation." "You're serious?" "Deadly." She disappeared through the swinging door to the back. I followed, ignoring the stares of a waiter who looked like he'd rather see me choke on my manners. The kitchen was clean enough for Fritz to nod approval. She pointed to a shelf where one bottle stood alone, dusty but intact. "That's one," she said. "The other? Well, I opened it last month." "Serve it." I poured 1 glass for a regular. He didn't like it, said it was off. "Smelled metallic," he said. I dumped the rest. "Off how?" I asked. "Sweet? Sour? Vinegary?" "Wrong," she said. "That's all. Just wrong." I pulled out my handkerchief, wrapped the surviving bottle, and said, "This one's coming with me." "You think there's poison in it?" "Maybe. Or maybe just poor taste. Either way, I wouldn't uncork it for tips." She leaned on the counter, her eyes sharp. Maury wasn't dumb. He knew his wine. If something went bad, it didn't happen by accident. "That's exactly what we're thinking." "Then you're not thinking enough." She said, "That partner of his, Rollo, he used to brag he could stretch a shipment. Said the city inspectors never check Portuguese reds because they're too busy with Italian imports." "Stretch how?" She shrugged. "You're the detective. I pour drinks." Back on the street, I called Wolfe and told him I had a second bottle. He said, "Do not jostle it. Bring it directly here. And Archie, no coffee on the way." That told me he was taking it seriously. Wolfe can forgive murder, but not caffeine near a chemical sample. When I got back to the brownstone, he had already cleared the office table and spread a white cloth over it like a surgeon preparing for delicate work. The tin box was open. The first bottle and cork sat at the center. Fritz hovered with a look that could have soured milk. "You have it?" Wolfe asked. I placed the bottle down gently. "From Barlow's Table. Twin to the one Mrs. Shale brought." He examined the glass through a magnifier, grunting softly. "Unlabeled, but the glass is of German manufacture. Curious for a Portuguese wine. I said, maybe the Portuguese ran out of bottles. Perhaps, he murmured, but the odds are poor. Fritz, bring a basin of ice. He chilled both bottles for 10 minutes, then pulled out a corkscrew shaped like it had been forged for surgery. The pop was soft, and a faint smell crept into the room, something acidic under the surface of fruit. Wolfe inhaled once, then moved back as though distancing himself from vulgarity. Do you perceive it, Archie? Yeah, like vinegar married gunmetal. Precisely. Acetate of lead, I think. Old trick used to sweeten sour wines in the 19th century. A fool's alchemy. Enough of it could kill. You think someone revived the recipe? Not someone. Something. He leaned back in the chair. A motive that hides in the mechanism of commerce. Rollo sells a stretched shipment. Honan, the watchman, discovers it. Someone silences him, but the widow, Mrs. Shale, she receives a threat instead of a bullet. Why? Maybe she was supposed to stay scared, not dead. Possibly. Wolfe's eyes drifted to the window. Mr. Goodwin, summon Inspector Kramer. Inform him discreetly that I have evidence of adulteration in imported wine with possible fatalities attached, and make sure he leaves his sarcasm at the door. When Kramer arrived, half an hour later, the sarcasm had come with him anyway. Wine now, he barked. What's next? Poison pickles? Wolfe ignored him. He gestured toward the bottles. 2 specimens, one possibly from a lot that killed a man named Honan, the other unconsumed. I require laboratory confirmation of lead acetate. Kramer snorted. And when it turns out to be a bad vintage, you'll buy the next case? Wolfe's voice cooled to marble. When it turns out to be lead, you'll have a murderer who traffics in commerce, rather, than violence. I leave the satisfaction of arrest to you. Kramer glared at him, then at me. Fine. But if this turns out to be nothing, it won't, I said. Trust me. He took the bottles and left, his footsteps heavy with skepticism. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half shut. It will take them until morning, he said. Government laboratories are slower than glaciers. Meanwhile, we invite Mr. Rollo for luncheon tomorrow. Tell him it's an informal consultation. He will come. Curiosity is the magnet of fools. And Saul will remain near the Shale woman. She may require protection from both guilt and reprisal. I nodded. If it's lead in those bottles, then whoever mixed it knew exactly what he was doing. Yes, Wolfe said softly. And that, Archie, is what disturbs me most. Knowledge in the wrong hands is more deadly than poison. It does not stop when the bottle is empty. He reached for his beer, and the silence that followed had the weight of something waiting to surface. I didn't say it out loud, but I had the same feeling. Somewhere between Brooklyn and that restaurant shelf, someone was preparing another vintage, this time with our names on the label. At 10 the next morning, Kramer called. His voice had the tone of a man forced to admit that reality had conspired against his skepticism. You were right, he said. Lead acetate. Enough in that bottle to floor an ox. We're sending the report over. Thank you, Inspector, Wolfe said, and hung up before gratitude could turn conversational. He glanced at me. That confirms it. A deliberate act of adulteration. Mr. Shale's business was modest, but ambition rarely stays proportional. We are dealing with greed in its chemical form. Then it's murder, I said. It is homicide, he corrected, by negligence or design. The difference will decide who dines with me and who dines in the tombs. The bell rang then. Fritz appeared with his subtle horror of timing expression. Mr. Chester Rollo is here. Wolfe nodded once. Show him in. Rollo entered with the shoulders of a man who expected either applause or accusation. He had tried for dignity, pressed suit, polished shoes, but it looked rented from anxiety. Wolfe didn't stand, of course. He never does. He indicated a chair with 2 fingers. "Mr. Rullo," he said, "I appreciate your punctuality." "I didn't have much choice," Rullo muttered. "Your man said it was important." "Everything is important to someone," Wolfe said. "To business, to life, to survival. Let us discuss yours." I stayed by the wall, notebook ready. Wolfe opened like a lawyer, presenting evidence to an invisible jury. "You told Mr. Goodwin that none of the unlabeled bottles were sold. Yet 2 have surfaced, one in the possession of Mrs. Shale, another at a restaurant. Both bear traces of lead acetate." Rullo blinked rapidly. "That's impossible." "Maury, he handled that batch himself. I told him it wasn't worth the risk." "The risk?" Wolfe's eyebrow rose slightly. "What risk precisely?" Rullo looked cornered. "Look, it wasn't poison. It was sweetener. Maury said a few ounces of the old compound, just to balance the taste, was harmless. He read it in a trade manual. He said the Portuguese used it before the war. Said it'd make the wine taste richer." "And you believed him?" Wolfe asked. "I didn't argue. He was the expert. Yet you claim to have kept the bottles separate." "I did." Rullo leaned forward. "After he fell, I checked every crate. I dumped half of them myself." "Not all, evidently. I don't know how the rest got out. Maybe Honan, he handled shipments off the books sometimes. Or maybe Maury gave a few away before he died." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. A man who experiments with poison to save pennies does not die conveniently without cause. "Describe his fall?" Rullo swallowed. "It was late. We were closing up. I left first. He said he'd lock up. Next morning they found him at the bottom of the cellar stairs. Head cracked. No sign of a struggle." "You assumed accident," Wolfe said softly, "because the alternative required imagination." Rullo looked from Wolfe to me. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Wolfe replied, "that your partner's experiments may have frightened someone who understood their consequences. Honan, perhaps, who knew the dock gossip, or another importer who preferred one less competitor." "Barton Vale," I said. Rullo flinched. "Vale, he's too slick. He's got the inspectors in his pocket. He'd never dirty his hands." "Which makes him dangerous," Wolfe said. "A man who outsources filth remains clean in the eyes of the law, but perhaps not for long." Rullo's forehead shone with sweat. "I told you everything I know. If you're right, then someone's framing me. And maybe her." "Her?" Wolfe repeated. "Lydia," Rullo said. "Maury's wife. You think she's innocent? She blamed me for everything, said the business killed him. Maybe she wanted revenge." "On whom?" Wolfe's tone sharpened. "Anyone left standing." When Rullo finally left, Wolfe sighed a low rumble that meant progress, not relief. "A fool," he said, "but not malicious. He lacked both intellect and initiative to orchestrate such an affair. The motive lies elsewhere, likely with profit disguised as protection." I asked, "You mean Vale?" "Possibly, or someone in his orbit. Arrange for Mr. Panzer to visit Vale's office. Obtain copies of his import licenses, customs clearances, and any records of shared shipments with Shale and Rullo. If denied, note the demeanor." "Anything for me?" "Indeed. You will call on Mrs. Shale again this evening. Tell her the laboratory confirmed contamination and that her husband's experiments were not accidental. Then observe her reaction carefully. I wish to know whether fear or relief dominates." By the time the city lights blinked on, I was back at her apartment. Lydia Shale opened the door slowly. She had traded her robe for a gray dress that looked as though it had been ironed for composure rather than fashion. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "is there news?" "There is," I told her. "Your husband's wine was poisoned. By design, not accident. Whoever mixed it knew exactly what he was doing." She went very still. Then it's true. What's true? She turned away, her hands clasped. He said it once. Half a joke, that one day his wine would make headlines. I thought he meant success. You didn't suspect? I suspected everything but that, she said quietly. I begged him to stop experimenting. He said the business was dying, that Barton Vale was undercutting him, that he had to compete or close. Did he mention Honan? Yes. Said Honan knew too much, that he wanted money to keep quiet. And did your husband pay him? No, Maurice said he'd take care of it another way. That was 3 days before he fell. That was the first time she looked me straight in the eye, and it wasn't the look of a liar. It was the look of someone realizing she'd outlived her ignorance. As I left, I noticed a shadow across the street. Saul, keeping watch. He nodded once. I started toward the car, but before I reached it, the lights in Lydia's apartment flickered. Then a faint pop, like a cork or a fuse, echoed from inside. I was up the stairs in 3 seconds flat. Smoke curled from the kitchen. I kicked the door open and saw her standing by the stove, frozen. A small flame licked from the gas burner beside a broken glass bottle. She wasn't hurt, but the smell, sharp, chemical, wrong, hit hard. Get back, I said, grabbing a towel to smother the flame. The fire died quick, but the room stank of sour metal. Her voice shook. I didn't do anything, it just... Yeah, I said, I believe you. Someone's trying to make sure you don't live long enough to tell your side. By the time I called Saul in, the smoke had thinned, but the danger hadn't. We checked every window. One latch bent from outside. Someone had tossed the bottle through the narrow gap, aiming for the stove. Back at the brownstone that night, Wolfe listened in silence. Then he said, "They are desperate. Desperation precedes revelation. Tomorrow, Archie, the noose tightens, not by force, but by reason." He closed his eyes, and heaven help the man who mistakes one for the other. The next morning started before the coffee did, which in Wolfe's house qualifies as mutiny. I came down to find him already in the office, not reading the Gazette, a sign that things had turned serious, but watching the light shift through the orchids in the window. Fritz was standing rigid by the sideboard, uncertain whether to serve breakfast or a condolence meal. Wolfe said, "You were not harmed last night. Not unless you count my sense of calm. Someone tossed a bottle through Mrs. Shale's kitchen window, almost landed in the flames. If I hadn't been there, she might have gone up like a flambé." "Then Providence is not entirely derelict," he murmured. "Sit down." He gestured toward a plate of eggs that had cooled to the temperature of logic. I sat. Saul says whoever threw it knew the layout. The angle was perfect, like they'd stood there before. "Then it was not random," Wolfe said. "Randomness rarely selects its victims twice." He reached for the phone and called Kramer. When the inspector's voice crackled through, Wolfe gave him the version fit for official digestion. Attempted arson, chemical traces, the widow still breathing. Kramer, predictably, blew like a tugboat. "You're telling me someone's out there throwing poison bombs at a woman, and you didn't call last night?" "I'm telling you now," Wolfe said calmly. "Had she died, you would have been informed earlier." Kramer hung up with a sound that implied future retribution. Wolfe replaced the receiver with the serenity of a man laying down a chess piece. "Archie," he said, "the next move is ours. Mr. Panzer's inquiries into Mr. Vale's affairs are due this morning. When he arrives, we shall have clarity, or at least an improved illusion of it." Saul came at 9:30. He looked like the city had agreed with him, which meant he'd been up since dawn. "Vale's clean on paper," he said. "Too clean. He's got the licenses, the customs receipts, everything. But one thing's odd. The shipment Maurice Shale handled, the Portuguese one, appears in Vale's ledger too, under consultation fee. Paid in cash, no details." Wolfe's eyes brightened faintly. A consultation fee, he repeated, for a competitor's shipment. That is either generosity or conspiracy. There's more, Saul said. Vale's assistant, tall, neat dresser, precise manner, fits the description of the guy who questioned Honan before his death. Name's Darian Colt. He left Vale's office the week after Shale's accident. Supposedly moved to Philadelphia. No forwarding address. Convenient geography, Wolfe said. A man who leaves just before the corpses begin to align. We must flush him out. I said, You want me to visit Vale and mention Colt's name? I can probably get a reaction. You will visit, Wolfe agreed, but you will not provoke. I prefer my adversaries articulate, not alarmed. See if Mr. Vale's courtesy can be stretched until it snaps. I headed for Midtown. Barton Vale's office was in one of those buildings where the lobby smells like old money and disinfectant. His secretary, blonde and efficient, tried to file me under unwanted, but I slipped past with my best approximation of legal authority and charm. Vale's office was all walnut and understatement. He was behind a desk the size of a lifeboat, wearing a suit that had never met dust. He rose just enough to suggest civility. Mr. Goodwin, I believe? Nero Wolfe's man. That's right. I'm here about a small matter, a shipment you once shared with Shale and Rullo Imports. Shared. His mouth twitched into what passed for a smile. We don't share, Mr. Goodwin. We compete. Then your books are lying, I said. They mention a consultation fee connected to that shipment. Portuguese Reds. Around December. He leaned back. Ah, that. I advised Mr. Shale on customs tariffs. A friendly arrangement. Paid in cash. It was a small favor, he said smoothly. Do detectives always audit the dead? Only when they keep turning up in each other's wine cellars. His gaze sharpened. Is this conversation official? Unofficial, I said. If it were official, you'd be answering Kramer, not me. That earned me a slow grin. Then you may tell Mr. Wolfe that my dealings were legitimate. As for this unfortunate poisoning rumor, I trust he'll find it more profitable to mind his own cellar. He stood, which was my cue to leave. I did, but not before noticing the framed photo behind him, a group shot from a trade conference, all smiles and toasts. At the far right, almost cropped out, was a man I recognized from Saul's description, tall, neat, severe, Darian Colt. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was finishing lunch. Vale's smooth as imported silk, I told him. He admits the payment, calls it advice, and there's a picture of Colt on his wall in happier times. Wolfe wiped his mouth. The assistant becomes increasingly interesting. Locate him, Archie. Philadelphia, if necessary. But first, we shall verify one more assumption. He reached for the phone again and called Fritz. Bring the cork from the mailed warning. When Fritz returned with the small tissue-wrapped piece of evidence, Wolfe held it up to the light. Note the markings, he said. See the tiny burn along the edge? Yeah. Somebody used a flame to sterilize it, maybe. Or to remove residue, he said. A crude attempt to erase identification. Yet the imprint remains, the faint ring of a manufacturer's seal. Continental, not domestic. The same as the bottles. Mr. Colt, perhaps, had access to both. He set the cork down with finality. Our visitor was not a dock worker, nor a widow's tormentor for sport. He was the link between Vale's enterprise and Shale's experiment. I said, meaning Vale had him silence Honan, then disappear. Or disappear him, Wolfe corrected. Men like Vale employ underlings precisely to absorb culpability, but such arrangements decay, like wine too long uncorked. He will make a mistake, which you'll be ready for. Which I shall create, he said calmly. We will invite Mr. Vale to my office tomorrow afternoon, ostensibly for clarification regarding his late colleague. I shall imply the existence of evidence implicating his assistant. If he is innocent, he will dismiss it. If guilty, he will attempt to retrieve or suppress it. Either reaction is instructive. I grinned. And I'm supposed to bait the hook? Indeed. Inform him at 5 o'clock that I've received certain documents from the Portuguese Trade Authority confirming irregularities in his shipments. Use the word confirmation. It stimulates guilt. He leaned back, half closing his eyes. Archie, it is always gratifying to see cupidity collide with conscience. One shatters, the other curdles. We shall soon learn which is stronger. That night I made the call. Vale's voice on the other end stayed steady, but there was a thread beneath it, a tightness, like piano wire stretched to the limit. "Mr. Wolfe wishes to see me?" he asked. "At 2 tomorrow," I said. "He promises enlightenment. Bring your appetite." The pause lasted 3 beats. "I never refuse an invitation to enlightenment," he said finally, and hung up. When I told Wolfe, he nodded once. "Excellent. The man will come wearing civility as armor. But armor, Archie, has joints." He looked toward the locked pantry where the poisoned bottle still waited, dark against its towel cradle. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we shall find the opening and slip the blade of reason through." The next day dawned gray and deliberate, which suited Wolfe's mood and matched the decor of his suspicions. By noon, the house had that uneasy stillness it gets before a visitor, like the hush before an orchestra tune-up. Wolfe was at his desk, not reading but thinking, eyes half closed, lips moving slightly as though arguing with himself in Latin. I'd learned to leave him alone in that state. You can't hurry a volcano. At 1:30, Fritz began his pre-battle ritual, which in our house means food. He laid out the lunch trays like we were hosting an emperor, quail eggs, asparagus, and a light Riesling. Wolfe ate as though preparing for mental combat, savoring each bite like a general inspecting troops. I wasn't hungry. Anticipation is a poor appetizer. At 2 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Vale had punctuality, which is the courtesy of men who plan their alibis. I opened the door to find him immaculate as ever, the same suit, the same composure, only his eyes looked more alert than relaxed. He had the manner of a man stepping onto thin ice that he insists will hold. "Mr. Goodwin," he said smoothly, "your employer promised enlightenment. I've brought my curiosity." "Let's hope it travels well," I said, leading him into the office. Wolfe didn't rise. He rarely does, but inclined his head in a way that implied dominion rather than politeness. "Mr. Vale," he said, "you are most obliging. Please sit. Beer or brandy?" "Neither, thank you." "Excellent. Sobriety sharpens the faculties, though dulls the courage." "No matter." Wolfe leaned back. "You are aware, of course, that the matter concerning the adulterated Portuguese shipment has expanded. I have received documents from Lisbon confirming the source and certain peculiar transactions involving your firm." Vale's eyelids twitched. "I've heard that rumor before. I assure you there were no peculiarities." "Indeed," Wolfe said mildly. "Then perhaps you can explain why your assistant, Mr. Darian Colt, handled correspondence addressed to Shale and Rullo Imports 2 months before their partnership dissolved." That landed. Vale blinked once, a slow recalibration. Colt had broad responsibilities. He may have assisted them unofficially. "Unofficial assistance," Wolfe murmured, "often hides official guilt. Mr. Colt has since absconded. A prudent man might suppose he fled to avoid inquiries regarding Mr. Shale's death, and that of the watchman, Mr. Honan." Vale's hand went to his cufflink, adjusting it with too much precision. "Those deaths were accidents." "Ah, yes," Wolfe said. "As convenient as symmetry. But accidents rarely write anonymous notes or throw bottles through widows' windows." Vale turned sharply to me, as if I'd invented that detail. "Bottles? What are you talking about?" "Last night," I said, "someone tossed a flaming gift through Mrs. Shale's kitchen window. Almost killed her. We don't think it was the neighborhood welcoming committee." He stood. "If you're suggesting—" "I am not suggesting," Wolfe interrupted, his voice a velvet trap. I am deducing. And I deduce that someone, perhaps Mr. Colt, perhaps not, wishes to ensure silence. Yet you, Mr. Vale, are conspicuously nervous for a man uninvolved. That did it. Vale's control cracked, not much but enough for me to see what lay beneath. Fear, edged with resentment. He said, You're making a serious accusation, Mr. Wolfe. I could sue for defamation. Of course, Wolfe said serenely. But a suit requires a plaintiff, and plaintiffs require innocence. I have little faith in either. He let the silence stretch until it had weight. Then he said softly, Where is Mr. Colt, Mr. Vale? Vale hesitated a heartbeat too long. I told you. He left. Where? I don't know. Indeed, but someone must know. And since he was last seen leaving your office, carrying a briefcase large enough for correspondence or documents, perhaps you could produce the contents. Vale's face stiffened. You're fishing. On the contrary, Wolfe said. I've already caught the fish. I merely wait for it to stop flapping. He reached for an envelope on his desk, and held it up. A letter, Mr. Vale, addressed to you but intercepted by accident. It bears Mr. Colt's handwriting. That was a bluff. I knew it because I'd been the one who typed that envelope this morning under Wolfe's instruction, but Vale didn't. His color drained. He sank back into the chair. What do you want? Truth, Wolfe said. Preferably before lunch digestion concludes. Vale's voice dropped to a rasp. Colt came to me 3 weeks ago. He said Shale was experimenting with additives. Claimed he could make cheap wine taste like aged stock. He asked for funding to expand the process. I refused. He went behind my back to Shale, offering a partnership. When Shale fell, Colt panicked. He thought Honan knew too much, that he'd been blackmailing both sides. I swear I told him to stay out of it. And he didn't. He said he'd handle it. The next thing I knew, Honan was dead. Colt came to my office that night, shaking. Said it was an accident, a gas leak. I told him to disappear. And you helped him. Vale didn't answer. Wolfe nodded, satisfied. Where? Philadelphia, he said finally. He has family there. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. Very well. Mr. Goodwin will contact the police. Mr. Kramer will retrieve Mr. Colt, and you, Mr. Vale, will remain available for further inquiries. If you flee, you will be pursued. If you prevaricate, you will be exposed. Vale stood stiffly. You'll regret this, Wolfe. Possibly, Wolfe said, but I rarely regret being right. When the door shut behind him, the office exhaled. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, the faintest curl at the corner of his mouth. Well, I said, that went down smooth. You think he told the truth? Enough of it, Wolfe said. Colt is the hinge. He devised the additive, persuaded Shale to test it, and when the bodies began to fall, sought refuge under Vale's shadow, but shadows shorten at noon. We will fetch him before dusk. Kramer arrived within the hour, bristling with suspicion but smelling opportunity. When I handed him the notes, he grunted. Philadelphia, huh? We'll see. He left with 2 men and the satisfaction of a hound with a scent. By evening, the call came. Colt was found in a boarding house outside the city, alive but trying to buy a train ticket under a false name. He'd confessed to an accident with the gas and begged for immunity. When I relayed the news, Wolfe's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped a notch. There are no accidents, Archie. Merely the consequences of convenience. He closed his eyes again. Tomorrow, they will bring him here. Then finally we uncork the last deception. It was said so calmly that for a moment I forgot the smell of scorched gas, the broken glass, the fear in Lydia Shale's eyes. But as I looked at Wolfe, still as marble under the lamplight, I realized what Colt would face when he entered that room tomorrow. Not rage, not force. Something far worse, truth, sharpened and cold. They brought Darian Colt to the brownstone just after 3 in the afternoon, in custody but not in handcuffs. Kramer has his small gestures of courtesy, and one of them is letting Wolfe do his own theater in his own house. Colt looked worse for the trip, a man who'd been living on anxiety and hotel sandwiches, but there was still something clipped about him, as if he believed proper posture might keep guilt from staining the suit. He had the eyes of a man trying to remember whether confession or silence offers the longer lifespan. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He never does for law enforcement, and certainly not for men who've been caught mid-flight. Kramer stood near the globe, hands in pockets, his face set in that blend of suspicion and satisfaction he reserves for days when he's got a live one but hasn't figured the angle yet. I sat behind Wolfe, notebook open, but mostly unnecessary. When Wolfe is in full form, you don't need shorthand. You just need memory. Colt took the chair across from the desk and glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the orchids as though trying to draw calm from something alive. Wolfe watched him, eyes hooded. He could have been observing a particularly perplexing species of insect. "Mr. Colt," Wolfe began, "you have had a journey, a self-inflicted one perhaps, but no less fatiguing. I trust the accommodations were tolerable." Colt's mouth twitched. They were functional. "Excellent," Wolfe said. "Now, let us proceed with clarity. You are here not because Inspector Kramer wishes it, nor because the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is eager to rid itself of your presence, but because you have made a series of choices that have intersected with my peace. That, sir, is intolerable." Kramer grunted. "Cut to it, Wolfe." "In due course," Wolfe murmured. "Mr. Colt, I will ask questions. You will answer. If you attempt deceit, I will know. I may not prove it, but I will know, and I will arrange proof at my leisure." Colt folded his hands in his lap. "Then I'll try to save you time." "Splendid," Wolfe said. "You were an employee of Barton Vale." "Yes, for 3 years. And before that, you worked briefly with Mr. Shale." "Consulted," Colt said. "Only for a few weeks." "About what?" Colt hesitated, then said, "Stabilizing imported reds. It was a harmless chemistry." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Harmless chemistry that produced lead acetate, a compound outlawed since the late 19th century. I assume that was an oversight." "It was meant to be safe," Colt said quickly. "Just a trace. Enough to soften the tannins." "Softening the tannins," Wolfe repeated. "By softening the drinker's organs. Admirable efficiency. And when Mr. Shale realized he had been sold poisonous progress, he quarreled with you." Colt's knuckles tightened. "He didn't understand the method. I told him it needed refinement, but he panicked. Said he'd destroy the batch and report it. And he fell down a flight of stairs." "I didn't touch him," Colt said sharply. "I swear it." Kramer snorted. "Every murderer says that." Colt turned on him. "I'm not a murderer. Maury was drunk that night. Ask anyone who knew him." Wolfe's tone was quiet but cutting. "And the watchman? Mr. Honan? Did he trip over your guilt, or was the gas merely another trace you miscalculated?" Colt's composure cracked. "That wasn't me. He came to me for money, said he'd talk to the papers. I told him I didn't have any. The next day he was dead. I thought—" His voice faltered. "I thought Vale had handled it." Kramer leaned forward. "Handled it how?" Colt didn't answer. The silence thickened until even the orchids seemed to listen. Wolfe said, "Mr. Colt, Barton Vale claims you confessed to him that evening, that you caused Honan's death, that you begged him for protection, and that he sent you away." "That's a lie," Colt said, voice trembling now. "I went to him for help, yes, but he was in it from the start. He funded the tests, told me to use Shale's business as cover. When it went wrong, he panicked. He said if it got out, we'd both go down. He made me disappear." "Why return?" Wolfe asked softly. Colt looked at the floor. "I saw the papers, the warning note, the fire. I thought he was tying up loose ends. I figured if I came in, I'd be safer in custody than running. Kramer exhaled through his nose. We'll see about that. He's got enough on him to hang a dozen Vales. Perhaps, Wolfe said, but I would not rush the noose. Mr. Vale is too intelligent to leave his fingerprints on crude acts. He will have created distance, paper, witnesses, deniability. We must invite him to collapse his own edifice. Colt swallowed. How? Wolfe looked at me. Archie, call Mr. Vale. Inform him that Mr. Colt has been apprehended and that I require his presence this evening at 7. Tell him we have evidence of his direct authorization of the adulteration and that I am affording him the courtesy of explanation before I turn the evidence over to the police. I nodded. Wolfe's voice had gone silky. The tone that meant the final act was in rehearsal. When I returned from the call, Wolfe was leaning back, eyes half closed, but the air around him felt charged. Kramer muttered something about traps and ethics, but Wolfe ignored him entirely. Mr. Colt, he said, you will remain here. Fritz will feed you. You will not attempt escape. It would be futile, and I detest futility. At 7 precisely, the doorbell rang again. Vale entered like a man walking into a storm he'd hoped would pass by. When he saw Colt seated near the wall, color drained from his face like ink in water. Wolfe gestured toward a chair. Mr. Vale, I thank you for your punctuality again. The presence of your former associate, Mr. Colt, need not disturb you. He is here to aid clarity. Vale didn't sit. This is absurd. You've no authority to detain me. Detain? Wolfe's brows rose. Heaven forbid. You may leave whenever you choose, but you will leave with Inspector Kramer, who stands ready to escort you, or you may remain and attempt reason. Which shall it be? Vale hesitated, then sat. Excellent, Wolfe said. Now, Mr. Colt has given us an illuminating account. It lacks only your refinement. He claims you financed the experimentation, directed its concealment, and arranged his disappearance after 2 deaths. I'm inclined to believe him, though his mind is not as exact as yours. Would you like to correct his imprecision? Vale's jaw clenched. You'll believe a frightened chemist over me. Over a frightened businessman, Wolfe said mildly. Easily. The difference is habit. Chemists fear explosion. Businessmen expect profit. Only one of them eventually ignites. For a long moment, Vale said nothing. His fingers tightened on the arm of the chair, the knuckles whitening. Then he looked at Colt with something halfway between fury and pity. You fool, he said. You think running to Wolfe will save you? It might, Colt said softly. You didn't try. Vale rose suddenly, but Kramer's men were faster. He froze, caught between indignation and resignation. Wolfe didn't move. His voice was almost kind. There are moments, Mr. Vale, when the most economical solution is confession. It costs nothing and spares the bother of resistance. Vale's shoulders slumped. He was supposed to destroy the batch, he said hoarsely. Shale insisted on bottling it. I only wanted the formula. I didn't kill anyone. Kramer's tone was dry. You'll have time to prove that. Let's go. When they were gone, the silence that remained wasn't relief. It was the slow settling of dust after collapse. Wolfe looked at me, then at Colt, who sat pale and still. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, see that Mr. Colt is delivered safely to the inspector's custody tomorrow, and have Fritz open a fresh bottle of Bordeaux. This house has endured too much chemical malpractice. He leaned back, closing his eyes. I have no taste for poison, Archie, neither in wine nor in men. Kramer came back 2 mornings later, which meant the wheels of the law had started to turn but hadn't yet found a gear. He didn't knock, he never does, and Fritz, loyal but realistic, no longer tried to bar him at the threshold. I was at my desk finishing the morning mail when he stomped into the office, smelling faintly of rain and irritation. Wolfe didn't look up from the book in his hand. which was his way of greeting a man whose visit was expected but unwelcome. "Well," Kramer said, "you'll be happy to know our friend Barton Vale's spending his days somewhere with bars on the windows. We've got Colt's signed statement and a half-dozen witnesses ready to swear to the cash transactions. But I'll tell you, Wolfe, the DA thinks you're half magician and half nuisance." "Half accuracy is better than none," Wolfe said, and turned a page. Kramer dropped a folder on the desk. "And here's something you'll like even less. The lab confirmed what you suspected. Those bottles were doctored in batches, meaning there could be more of them floating around. We've traced 6, maybe 7. 2 already accounted for. The rest, anyone's guess." That got Wolfe's attention. He closed the book. "And you imagine I will assist you in scavenging the residue of another man's greed?" "I imagine," Kramer said, "that you don't want anyone else dropping dead from Brooklyn wine, especially if one of those bottles ends up in your own pantry." Fritz, from the doorway, made a faint sound that might have been a prayer. Wolfe sighed. "Archie, the list." I opened the folder and read the names aloud. 4 buyers, all in the city. A hotel in Midtown, a private club near the park, and 2 restaurants that could probably afford better vintages but enjoyed bragging about rare finds. Wolfe listened, fingertips pressed together. "Inspector," he said, "you will of course confiscate all stock bearing resemblance to those bottles." "Already in motion, but we're short on eyes. Your Mr. Goodwin's better at ferreting than any of my men. If he'd—" "Archie," Wolfe interrupted, "will assist to the extent his dignity allows." I nodded. "My dignity's been rented out before, but it pays well." "Which one first?" "The club," Wolfe said. "They'll lie the least and charge the most." The Crescent Club was one of those mid-tier sanctuaries for men who weren't important enough for the Union League, but rich enough to pretend. The steward, a lean relic named Phelps, led me to the cellar with the reverence of a priest showing off relics. It didn't take long to spot the unlabeled bottle. The glass was identical, the cork stamped faintly with that same foreign seal Wolfe had noticed. I borrowed it in the name of public safety, left my card, and returned to the car before the man could call his lawyer. By the time I hit the brownstone, Saul Panzer was already there. Wolfe had summoned him without telling me, which he does sometimes just to prove he's ahead. Saul handed over a sheaf of notes. "Colt's confession checks," he said. "Vale's signatures on the customs forms. Looks like he financed 6 small shipments through shell companies. Same glass supplier, same dock number. He was building a private label, cheap imports dressed as exclusives. Shale was his first test case." Wolfe grunted. "And the contamination? Probably a holdover from the experiments," Saul said. "They thought they could control the dosage. They couldn't." I said, "So that's the science lesson. What about motive?" Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed. "Ambition, Archie. The purest toxin of all. Mr. Vale sought prestige, Mr. Shale sought profit, and Mr. Colt sought validation. Each ingested a portion of the same poison." Kramer scowled. "You make it sound poetic. It's manslaughter." "Semantics," Wolfe said, "but the distinction matters little to the dead." The phone rang. Fritz answered, murmured something, and brought the receiver to Wolfe. "For you, sir, Mrs. Shale." He took it with the faintest frown. "Yes, madam." A pause. "Indeed." "No, you were right to call. Mr. Goodwin will come at once." He hung up and turned to me. "Mrs. Shale has received another envelope. No note this time, only a key. She believes it to be from her late husband." "From the grave?" I said. "That's generous of him." "Go," Wolfe said. "Do not open the key's lock until I have examined it." Her apartment felt different now. Not fearful, but drained as if danger had wrung it out. She met me at the door holding a small brass key wrapped in tissue paper. "It came in this," she said. "No return address. Just the key." It was small, ornate, and old, The kind that belonged to a private box or safe, not an apartment door. I slipped it into an envelope and promised to get Wolfe's verdict. She hesitated before I left. "Mr. Goodwin, will this ever really be over?" "That depends," I said, "on whether your husband left more surprises." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe examined the key through his magnifier, turning it slowly. "Bank box," he said. "Possibly a safe deposit. Early design, pre-war, the kind used by smaller institutions." "Shale and Rullo's bank?" I asked. "Perhaps," he said. "But the timing is instructive. Someone sent it now when its significance might seem trivial. A final hand attempting to tidy what remains untidy." Kramer, who'd stuck around longer than usual, said, "You think Vale planted it?" "Impossible," Wolfe said. "He's been under your surveillance since his arrest." "No, this comes from another party. Someone who knew of the box and of Mrs. Shale's address. Mr. Shale himself might have given it to a confidant before his death." "Or," I said, "someone who wants her to open it and get herself killed." "Exactly," Wolfe said. "We shall open it here, with appropriate precautions." The next morning we went to the bank listed on Shale's old invoices. The manager, a man whose politeness had a profit margin, took one look at the key and nodded. "Yes, that's one of ours. Box 317, registered to Mr. Morris Shale." With Kramer's badge and Wolfe's glare working in tandem, the box was opened in a small glass cubicle. Inside were papers, neatly folded, a sealed envelope, and, resting atop them, a half-full bottle of wine. The manager's eyebrows climbed. "That shouldn't be there," Wolfe said. "On the contrary, it should be exactly there." "Archie," carefully. I lifted the bottle. The cork bore the same mark, the same cursed seal. Wolfe examined the papers while Kramer waited like a man guarding a fuse. Inside the envelope was a letter dated 2 days before Shale's fall. It was addressed to his wife. Wolfe read aloud, his voice steady. "Lydia, if anything happens to me, tell them to look to Barton. He's not my enemy, but he's trapped as I am. This wine will prove it. Don't drink it. Burn it." Kramer exhaled through his teeth. "He knew." "Of course," Wolfe said softly. "He knew, and perhaps he was about to speak, hence his accident." He turned to me. "That bottle will go to the lab, but it changes nothing. We already possess the truth. What remains is its presentation." Back in the car, he was silent for a long time, the kind of silence that sounds like thought turning over in deep water. When he finally spoke, it was more to himself than me. "Men," he said, "may adulterate wine to make it sweeter, or life to make it easier. The result is always the same. Bitterness." I didn't answer. He didn't expect me to. The brownstone waited ahead, serene as ever, while the city outside kept moving, no wiser, but still thirsty. That evening the brownstone was unusually quiet. Fritz moved through the kitchen like a man trying not to disturb an idea, and Wolfe sat in his chair, the sealed envelope from the bank on the table beside him, untouched. The bottle had gone to Kramer's laboratory, with enough police tape around it to discourage even Fritz's curiosity, but the rest of Shale's papers were spread across Wolfe's desk like a jigsaw he didn't yet want to solve. I'd seen that look before. It meant he was holding a conclusion by the tail, waiting to see if it would bite or purr. I gave him an hour, then risked a question. "You've got that expression again, like the world's hiding something obvious, and it's starting to annoy you." Wolfe's eyelids lifted halfway. "It always is, Archie. Obviousness is humanity's favorite camouflage. We disguise simplicity with chaos to make ourselves feel necessary." "Sure," I said. "But what's the chaos in this case? We've got Vale behind bars, Colt in a cell down the hall, Shale 6 feet under, and a note that wraps it up neatly. The wine was poison, the greed was fatal, and the moral is don't experiment with your dinner. Why the long face?" He steepled his fingers. "Because, confound it, the symmetry is too perfect. When reality arranges itself so artfully, I suspect an artist. I'd learned long ago that the best way to make Wolfe talk was to say nothing. He waited for a moment, then sighed as if conceding to his own thoughts. Mrs. Shale's key was delivered after Mr. Vale's arrest. That timing is untenable if he orchestrated the delivery. Mr. Colt, for all his frailty, lacks initiative. Yet someone wanted that box discovered. Someone who knew it contained evidence and who wished the evidence to appear precisely now, when it could injure no one but enhance the illusion of finality. You're saying somebody staged the last act to look tidy? Precisely. Who's left to do that? Mrs. Shale herself? He looked at me, eyes half-lidded. Do you find her incapable? Of poison, maybe. Of planning? No. But why would she send herself the key? To control the narrative, he said. Women in distress are seldom as helpless as men prefer to think. Consider her position, widowed, entangled in scandal, dependent on the perception of innocence. If she anticipated discovery of the box, she might prefer to find it herself, thereby shaping its contents to her advantage. I leaned back. You think she knew about the box before it arrived? Possibly. Or perhaps she knew what it symbolized, her husband's knowledge, his guilt, and his attempt at repentance. She may have wished to expose him selectively, ensuring her own absolution while directing condemnation toward others already condemned. You mean she used the key like bait, to close the book? Just so. The gesture of revelation is a powerful substitute for truth. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Fritz went to answer, and a minute later returned with Inspector Kramer again. He looked tired, which meant he'd been arguing with the district attorney. He tossed his hat on the rack and said, You'll like this, Wolfe. The lab report's in. That last bottle from the bank box. No lead acetate. Clean as a sermon. That got Wolfe's eyes fully open. Clean. Not a trace, Kramer said. Good wine, too. Expensive stuff. So much for Shale's confession to his wife. Maybe he meant the box as an apology, not a warning. Phooey, Wolfe muttered. Men who fear for their lives do not compose sentimental riddles. They arrange contingencies. That wine was not meant for her sentiment. It was meant for proof. If it was clean, then someone replaced it before delivery. Kramer scowled. You saying my evidence locker leaks? I am saying, Wolfe replied, that the substitution occurred before the box reached you. The key was mailed, the box opened under supervision, and the contents documented. No, the exchange happened earlier, at the source. Someone accessed the box before Mrs. Shale received her key. The simplest explanation is that the key she was sent was not the original. That made Kramer's jaw twitch. Then we're back to her. Indeed, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin, call Mrs. Shale. Ask her to visit. Tell her the investigation requires clarification. Tonight. She arrived within the hour. Pale but composed, in a dark suit that made her look more deliberate than fragile. Fritz took her coat, and Wolfe greeted her with the solemn courtesy he reserves for people he's about to dissect. Mrs. Shale, he said, you have our gratitude for your cooperation. I must, however, trouble you with one more detail. The bottle recovered from your husband's deposit box contained no adulteration. Her eyes flickered, but her voice stayed even. Then he was innocent. Wolfe's tone stayed mild. That would comfort us all, if the facts allowed it. Unfortunately, they do not. Someone replaced that bottle with another of identical appearance. That act required knowledge of both the box and its contents. You alone had the opportunity after your husband's death. She drew in a slow breath. You're accusing me? I am proposing a hypothesis, Wolfe said. One you may refute if capable. Your husband, remorseful, prepared the letter and stored the poisoned bottle as evidence. When you discovered his guilt, you removed the bottle and substituted a harmless one, intending to protect his memory. Later, you mailed yourself the key to ensure the box would be found under official eyes, preserving the illusion of his innocence and your own. Kramer made a sound halfway between a growl and a cough. You got proof, Wolfe, or just that fancy logic of yours? Wolfe gestured to me. Archie, the tissue in which the key was wrapped. I produced it from the evidence envelope. Wolfe pointed. Observe the faint imprint of sealing wax on the paper's edge. That wax matched the stamp used by the late Mr. Shale. His initials? Inverted. Only Mrs. Shale could have sealed it, having access to his personal effects. The mailing occurred from a local postmark, 2 blocks from her residence. It is conclusive. Lydia Shale stood motionless, then slowly sat. He wasn't a monster, she said quietly. He made mistakes, yes, but he didn't kill anyone. I couldn't let the world remember him that way. No, Wolfe said softly. You merely crafted a version of him more palatable than the truth. You feared disgrace more than you valued accuracy, and yet, by that act, you've given him what he sought, a form of redemption, though false. She looked up, eyes bright but dry. Will they charge me? Kramer shifted uncomfortably. For swapping a bottle? Probably not. The DA likes clean endings. Then you have your ending, she said. When she left, the air in the office felt heavier, as if her calm had stayed behind. Kramer muttered something about moral gymnastics and went off to file his report. Wolfe didn't move until the door closed. You knew she'd confess, I said. I hoped she would, he said. Not for the record, merely for herself. Concealment corrodes the soul, Archie, much as lead corrodes the blood. He reached for his beer, looked at it for a moment, then set it down, untouched. This case began with poison in a bottle, he said, and ends with poison in a conscience. Both are fatal in sufficient quantity. Fritz entered quietly, bearing the dinner tray. Wolfe nodded but didn't eat. I watched him a moment, then said, You know, for a man who hates commotion, you sure do invite a lot of it. He gave me a look that might have been a smile or indigestion. Nonsense, Archie. I merely permitted entry long enough to demonstrate its folly. Then I sent it away. Outside, the city hummed its same indifferent tune, but inside, the brownstone was still again, its order restored, its master at peace, and the taste of bitterness, faint but lingering, in the air. The following morning began the way all endings should, quietly, as though the city itself had decided not to interrupt the conclusion. Wolfe was at his desk, reading Kramer's final report with a look of polite contempt. I had my feet on the corner of the rug, nursing coffee, watching him digest bureaucracy like it was an unfamiliar species of food. They are calling it an accident, he said finally. Mr. Shale's death, Mr. Honan's demise, Mr. Vale's culpability, all folded neatly into administrative language. Contributory negligence, they call it, an elegant phrase for human stupidity. It sells better than greed and panic, I said, and it keeps the press from scaring wine drinkers into switching to gin. He made a low sound. Not quite agreement, not quite disdain. The newspapers will print a paragraph and forget it by Sunday. Mrs. Shale will retreat to her borough and live under the illusion of closure, and the world will continue to mistake concealment for order. Which, I said, is your polite way of saying everyone learned nothing. He turned a page, eyes narrowing. On the contrary, I've learned something, not new, but reaffirmed, that the human appetite for deception is as inexhaustible as its appetite for comfort. Both are gluttonous and equally fatal when indulged. Fritz entered then with the morning mail. There was an envelope addressed in an elegant, unfamiliar hand. Wolfe took it, slit it open with a letter knife, and drew out a single sheet. His brows rose slightly, which for him was an exclamation. It is from Mrs. Shale, he said. She's writing thank yous now. Listen, he said and read aloud. Mr. Wolfe, your precision has given me more peace than pity ever could. I will not defend what I did. I only hope that the truth, as you define it, will rest easier on the dead than it does on the living. I've taken your advice. The remaining bottles have been destroyed. There will be no more poison in my house. Save memory. With gratitude, Lydia Shale. He folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the report. A tidy gesture, he said, though I doubt she understands the irony. She burned the bottles, I said. That's something. Destruction of evidence, Wolfe corrected. Still, in this instance, the law may forgive what reason condones. He rose then, an event worth recording, and went to the globe, spinning it with one thick finger until it stopped on Portugal. A nation of winemakers, he murmured. For centuries they have labored to bottle sunlight, and here, in our enlightened era, men import that sunlight only to pollute it. Maybe they thought they were improving it, I said. He shot me a glance. Improvement, Archie, is the most dangerous word in any language. It justifies meddling with what ought to be left alone, wine, truth, or character. I grinned. You mean me. Occasionally, he said and returned to his chair. But you are incorrigible, not poisonous. The doorbell rang. Fritz went and came back with Sol Panzer, who looked as fresh as ever despite 2 nights without rest. He handed Wolfe a small folder. For your records, he said. Vale's trial is already arranged. Colt took a deal. He'll testify. Kramer sends his regards, though not in writing. Spare me the courtesy, Wolfe said. The man's gratitude is as indigestible as his cigars. Sol smiled faintly, nodded to me, and left as quietly as he'd come. Wolfe didn't open the folder. He simply stared at it a moment, then said, That concludes our involvement. The rest belongs to the machinery of justice, which grinds with the speed and delicacy of a millstone. You're not even curious about the verdict. He reached for his beer. The verdict is irrelevant. Guilt is immutable, independent of legal recognition. When a man adulterates wine, he adulterates himself. Whether he is punished by the courts or by his own reflection makes no difference to me. Then I'll take that as your closing argument. Take it as you wish, he said, but do not mistake it for satisfaction. There is no satisfaction in human folly, only the confirmation of its permanence. I watched him drink, and for a long minute the room settled into the kind of peace that only follows disorder. Fritz cleared away the remains of breakfast. Theodore's steps creaked faintly upstairs, and somewhere beyond the window the traffic droned, a reminder that the city, like guilt, never stops moving. After a while I said, You know, it's funny. The whole thing started because a woman brought you a bottle of wine. He looked at me over the rim of his glass. Most trouble begins with hospitality, Archie. That is why I practice it so sparingly. He drained the glass and set it down with deliberate finality. Fritz, he called, inform Theodore I will attend the orchids at 4, then prepare the veal. Tonight we dine without conversation. Fritz's voice floated from the doorway. Yes, sir. Wolfe closed his eyes, leaning back as if reclaiming his solitude by force of will. The great man at rest again, his kingdom restored, the brownstone sealed against intrusion. I stood, picked up my hat, and lingered at the door. You know, I said, there's a bottle of Chianti in the kitchen. Fritz says it's harmless. Then drink it yourself, Wolfe muttered. I've had enough wine from Brooklyn to last a lifetime. That was my cue. I left him to his orchids and his principles, both equally demanding, and stepped out into the afternoon. The sky had cleared, and for the first time in days, the air didn't smell of vinegar or guilt. As I walked down West 35th, I thought about Lydia Shale burning her husband's sins one bottle at a time, and about Wolfe sitting in that chair, dissecting humanity like a corpse he never quite finished with. Maybe he was right. Improvement was dangerous, but some of us kept trying anyway. Maybe that's what kept the city alive. By the time I reached the corner, I decided Fritz's Chianti could wait. The taste of this case was still on my tongue, and it wasn't one any wine could wash away. Behind me, in the brownstone, order had reclaimed its throne. The orchids breathed, the beer was cold, and Nero Wolfe, immovable, infuriating, and infallible, sat in his fortress of reason, content to let the world outside ferment at its own peril.